Together, these engines cost about $70,000. And in a previous video, you saw how sketchy this transom was, which, if left alone, these engines would have ended up ripping that transom off the back of the boat.
225 pounds, gonna slap my wrist like
and then proceeding to sink down into the water, losing those 70 G's and potentially also sinking the boat, costing way more than just 70 grand. The way this hull was designed is still super interesting though. Even after quite a bit of research, I'm still unclear on whether or not this hull came with a bracket and outboards from the factory back in 1985, or if the boat was actually built with inboards and the bracket was added later. I am pretty sure though it was designed from a larger hull that came with inboards, but the bracket thing is still a mystery to me. But yeah, if left alone, the weight and the torque of these engines would be catastrophic. So the transom had to be reinforced with a few layers of glass and these braces that spanned over the weaker parts of the transom that weren't originally strengthened into the transom. We went over how these different liners, the transom, and how the deck wasn't attached all together in that other video, so this video is going to be the follow-up where we'll actually be putting this thing back together and then take it out for some test runs to ensure that we aren't at risk of losing these engines. Once the glasswork had been done, we were able to get back in here and drill back out the holes where the bolts go to attach the bracket to the boat, as well as clean the bracket and the transom before remounting the bracket to the boat.
Bienvenidos, señoras y señores. Welcome to Telemundo. Today we are going to talk about the weather, and it is about 500 degrees outside, with the sun hitting the freaking side of my head.
Use the hammer.
Yeah, it's a hammer right there.
Tomorrow is another day, huh?
Hold on. Let me get the proper. Let me get the proper.
We used new and larger mounting plates on the inside of the transom as well, just to spread out the load from the bolts and give a little more strength.
One more.
Once we had the bracket mounted back onto the boat, we could then remount the engines back onto the bracket and hook up the tie bar and all that stuff that goes back here on the engines. A good trick to know about is grabbing out the trim unit wires from the power tilt and trim on the engine and using a jump pack to trim the unit so that the engine bracket is at the same angle as your transom or the bracket that you are mounting the engine to.
Whenever we hang engines, a lot of times we like to hang the port first, because of where the rigging comes in. All the rigging comes in here, goes in here, and it's all back here. So it's always nice to do the port engine first. That way you can actually stand here and do all your rigging and then put the next engine on. So that way again you can stand on the starboard side of the engine and do all the rigging. Makes it easier when it comes time to rigging. And since Don's over here going to be doing all the rigging, we're trying to be nice to the guy, right?
Well, it's not going to matter anyway. All the rigging's in the boat, and we got to hang both of these by today.
This is true.
All right, Aaron.
Then we just needed to put all this stuff back onto the transom. There was quite a bit of stuff already that was mounted back here. We had to pull the rigging back out to the engines and then re-rig the engines. But the rest of the stuff that was here, like the fuel selector valve, the battery switches, a couple of battery chargers, the zip weight controller hub, the water separators, and some other stuff like some ground bars and whatnot. But a lot of this stuff was added on as the years went by, so we mounted everything back the best way that we could, putting the stuff around the braces that were glassed into the transom.
All right, here we are. We're going to do a little strength test on the transom. We're in the water. We've got it all beefed up. Here you go, Donnie. Let's do a little test and see. I'm going to do one little punch and you can check it out, see if the transom flexes at all. No flex. Okay.
So now that we are actually out here on the water for the test drive, this is where I am like legitimately impressed. With the transom now strengthened, we have the ability to see some of the performance and really feel the handling of this boat. And this thing is pretty ridiculous. It really is impressive the way this hull handles in the water. The bracket's super solid and everything looks really good back here with the water coming off of the bottom of the boat. The torquiness of the engines is also rather insane as well. Even at a higher cruising speed, when you get into it, it'll literally pin you into the seat, and who doesn't like the feeling of when a boat lunges forward from cruising speed? I mean, come on. Mind you, this is still a rather large boat. I mean, it's a fatter center console, it's got a wider beam of like 11 feet, a massive T-top tower that spans from gunnel to gunnel. I know the hull is modeled more like a sport fishing type of hull, which is why you can feel the control of that type of a boat, which makes the handling pretty amazing, especially since we are seeing 48 knots out of this thing at wide open, which is like 55 miles an hour. Just watch the way that it'll take a course adjustment while planed out.
Dude, it feels so much faster back here.
46 knots.
Oh, so we're in the 50s, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Dude, solid.
Then there's also this whole shot from these V8s, which is another thing that's just awesome. Even when you get into it kind of softly, like the boat still gets up and goes, hitting cruising speed in just a matter of seconds without having to really pin the handles either. And then when you trim them up, you can feel those air channels that are in the hull really release the hull from the water, and then she's just scooting. And the weight of the boat really lets the boat sit back down into the water rather gently too, without swamping the outboards. Now the turning of the boat is also really clean. The boat really sticks itself into the turn, and then when you come out of the turn, the torque of those V8s again is just insane. This is where we ended up actually getting the 48 knots out of the boat too. And I'm definitely going to have to be putting this boat and setup into one of my more favored boats now. It's just impressive the performance and handling that it has.
Now for the test drive, it's looking pretty good. We got 48 miles an hour, well no, it's knots. So we got 48 knots an hour, and yeah, 48 knots. For the test drive, it was looking pretty good. We got 48 knots, wide open throttle, trimmed out, and I mean, we got no flex in the transom. It went very smoothly for the test drive, and for just the beefing up of the transom here, we got a bunch of braces they got put in here and glassed in, and then glassed all the way out, along with some beefier brackets to hold the bracket on in place. Other than that, all the stuff got put back in. These 300s are super torquey, and we got no flex out of the bracket. The engine height is right where we want it to be, and I'm thinking that he is going to be super happy with this boat. I'm actually super impressed for how torquey these engines are. I mean, for this big of a boat with the tower that it has on it, I mean, for that kind of a tower and this boat to be doing 48 knots is pretty impressive for something that came out of 1985.